Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session today. We are going to be having a strategic conversation for financial institutions on what it looks like to move from the FFIEC CAT to the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. My name is Alyssa Pugh, and I am the GRC Content Manager for Tandem. What this means is that I spend a lot of time reading frameworks, guidance, and regulations, and then I get to create resources like this session to help people comply and be secure. I have been doing this for just shy of 12 years now, and I am so excited to be here with you today. Before we get started, just a quick disclaimer, this presentation is for information only. It contains my own opinions and it is proprietary. And a few housekeeping items. This session does have audio and video, so if all you can see is the PowerPoint, well then you'll still get the same great information, just not our faces. And at the end of the session, give us your feedback and you just might win an Amazon gift card. The slides, recording, and certificate of attendance will be sent to you via email after the session. And finally, please feel free to interact with us today using the questions panel. We have over 500 people registered, and because we have a lot of topics to cover, we will be saving your questions for the very end. So please stick around. We will get to as many as possible, and if we don't get to your question during the webinar, we will follow up later via email. This webinar is hosted by Tandem, a cybersecurity governance, risk management, and compliance application by Conetrix. We work specifically with financial institutions to help them manage and improve their cybersecurity with our suite of web applications for things like vendor management, business continuity planning, and of course, cybersecurity assessments. We have been around since 2008, and we currently provide services to more than 1,700 financial institutions in all 50 states. So enough about us. We'd also love to get to know you. We have a few poll questions throughout our time today, and we'd love for you to participate, and I know everybody else on the call would as well. So up first, what type of organization do you currently work for? Give me just a second here and let me launch that poll. Our answer options are going to be bank, credit union, other financial institution, third-party service provider, and other. And if you choose that other option, please send us a note. Let us know where you're from. We would love to get to know you. All right, we've got about 3/4 voted, so I'm going to close that poll and share those results with you. The vast majority of our attendees today are from banks and credit unions, so not a whole lot of surprises there, but we are so glad to have all of you here with us today. Our second poll question kind of goes hand in hand with that first one, and this is just to gauge what is your organization's asset size. So for those financial institutions, let us know what is your current asset range. So our answer options here range from less than 250 million to more than 5 billion, and we are seeing a beautiful bell curve showing up there. So I will give you a few more seconds to respond to that poll question. All right, I am going to close that and share those results. And I said a bell curve, but it's close. We've got about 30% in the 1 to 5 billion range, 22% in the 500 million to a billion, and then on out from there. So we are talking with a lot of community financial institutions today. And I'll say thank you so much for sharing. Wherever you find yourself, I hope we are going to have something super helpful for you today. For our agenda, we are going to start with a brief overview of the NIST CSF, just to kind of orient ourselves, get the wheels turning, and connect some dots to the FFIEC CAT. Then for most of our time today, we are going to be having an interview with CSF expert Daniel Eliot from the NIST Applied Cybersecurity Division. After the interview, we are going to wrap up with some bonus content where I will show you how to use Tandem to complete the NIST CSF. And if all of that sounds like fun to you, then get out your favorite coffee cup, fill it with your favorite pumpkin spice beverage, get a notepad to make some notes because there's going to be some good stuff here today, and let's get started. So we are going to kick things off with the NIST CSF with an overview of the NIST CSF. If you'd like to get a copy, you can download it now at nist.gov/cyberframework. I'm also going to ask our team to share a link to that in the chat for you. The NIST Cybersecurity Framework has grown and improved a lot over the last decade. It all started in February 2013 with Executive Order 13636, which called for improved cybersecurity for critical infrastructure. That's a mouthful. And that's especially relevant today, though, because the financial industry is one of the 16 critical infrastructure sectors. A year later, in February 2014, NIST published version 1.0 of the CSF, and in June 2015, the FFIEC CAT was released, which really it built on CSF principles to create a framework for financial institutions. The CSF was updated to version 1.1 in April 2018, and in June 2022, NIST announced version 2.0, which was officially published in February 2024. Today, the CSF continues to evolve with ongoing development of community profiles and quick start guides to make adoption easier for organizations. And just to note, a big reason we're here, in August of 2025, the FFIEC sunset the CAT, which has really prompted many financial institutions to start using or considering the CSF as a replacement. So I'm curious, for our audience today, does your organization use the NIST CSF? I'm going to launch that poll for you. And our answer options here are yes, we are actively using it. Yes, we are starting to use it. Not yet, but we are considering it. No, we are not planning to use it, and not applicable, or I don't know. Okay, we will give that just a few more seconds here. And I'm going to share those results with you. And almost half of our attendees say not yet, but we are considering it. And a third of our attendees say, yes, we are starting to use it. So that is a lot of organizations that are just getting familiar with the CSF on the call today. So thank you guys so much for sharing. Again, I hope this is going to be a great introduction. So I want to spend just a few minutes setting the stage and talking about what makes the CSF special. First and foremost, I want to mention this function wheel. So even if you're not overly familiar with the CSF, you are likely familiar with this visual, or at the very least, the functions of govern, identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. In some form or fashion, those functions have been adopted by many other frameworks. For example, the CAT was actually mapped to the CSF functions. The OCC Cybersecurity Exam Program is based on these CSF functions. The CRI profile is a community profile for the CSF. So as far as frameworks go, these functions really make the CSF the Rosetta Stone or the gold standard of frameworks. I do want to dive in a little bit deeper into the CSF structure. So we've already covered the functions, so let's look a level deeper into the protect function as an example. Inside of each function, like this one, the CSF organizes cybersecurity activities into categories. These categories are groupings of similar ideas. So I've just got the acronyms listed here, but they're going to represent things like authentication, training, data security, and the like. Those are categories. Then inside of each category are these individual items called subcategories. Each subcategory is written as a statement of an outcome, something an organization wants to achieve. Looking at a specific example, in the CSF, an outcome might say something like, backups of data are created, protected, maintained, and tested. This is written as an outcome. It's a very clear statement about the results an organization should achieve. Now, I've heard some people question whether these CSF outcomes, like this one, provide the same coverage as the CAT. So I'd like to take a minute just to unpack that with an example. If you compare this with the FFIEC CAT, what you'll see is basically what backups might look like at different stages of maturity, from creating a backup plan to testing the backups to protecting the backups through things like air gapping and good engineering. I highlight these to show you that we're not really comparing two completely different things. Many outcomes from the CSF are addressed in the CAT and vice versa. One topic that the CAT didn't address very thoroughly was the idea of maintaining backups. This would include things like regular updates and retention management. So I guess this is kind of implied in a few different areas, but it's not explicitly mentioned in the CAT. Another kind of issue with the CAT that they ran into was that those maturity labels were very subjective and did not always age well. For example, testing your backups was considered an evolving activity, and this bottom innovative item was about protecting your backups from compromise, and that's considered pretty foundational to other frameworks like the CSBS RSAT. So I'm not going to read this whole quote to you, but the CAT's outdatedness was one of the key reasons the FFIEC pointed financial institutions to other frameworks like the NIST CSF. The FFIEC acknowledged that the updated CSF reflects the broader security and resilience goals of the government in a way that the CAT could no longer effectively do. The outcomes of the CSF focus on what need to be true, while providing the flexibility to decide how to get there based on size, risk, and complexity. Of course, even freedom can benefit from some guardrails sometimes. So in the CSF, these guardrails come in the form of what they call implementation examples. These are illustrations or pictures of how an organization might achieve the stated outcome. For instance, on the backups outcome, the examples include performing near real-time backups, testing backups and restores annually, securely storing backups offline and offsite, and enforcing geographic separation for backup storage. If those sound familiar, that's because these implementation examples really closely align with the CAT declarative statements. And again, even going a little further than what the CAT suggested with the geographic separation one. Speaking from personal experience, last year I had the opportunity to co-author the ISACA audit work program for the NIST CSF 2.0, and I'll say these implementation examples are awesome. They are so valuable, so practical, and they give organizations concrete, tangible guidance without being overly prescriptive. So if you're looking for guiding principles to help you implement or audit against the CSF, these examples are a great place to start. If I can sum all of this up and put a nice little bow on it, it's this. The CSF is a flexible framework created and supported by NIST. Its outcome-focused approach makes it a strong foundation for other frameworks and a solid option for financial institutions who may be moving away from the CAT. And I think this is why so many financial institutions are actively leaning into the CSF as a replacement, even if there are some questions floating around some of the outcomes. But that is exactly why we are here today. And I have to tell you, I have been looking forward to this conversation for a long time. I think you're in for something really special. So I'm going to ask our guest to go ahead and turn on his camera while I introduce him. We are thrilled to be joined today by Daniel Eliot. Daniel works within the Applied Cybersecurity Division at NIST. And in his role, Daniel helps lead the NIST CSF 2.0 project and serves as the lead for small business engagement, helping expand resources and promote adoption of the framework. Daniel previously held roles at MITRE, the National Cybersecurity Alliance, and the University of Delaware. So without further ado, welcome, Daniel. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. My gosh, that intro and that overview were so good. I just wanted to keep listening to you talk.
You are too kind. You are the star of our show today. We are so excited to get to pick your brain and learn from your experience. So before we get into the heart of things, though, I would love for you to get a chance to share with our audience, how did you get into cybersecurity and what is your favorite part of your job? I'll say today, but maybe not today specifically, but your favorite part of your job in general.
Yeah, you know, I got into cybersecurity like many people. I fell into it. I don't even know when I was going for an undergrad if there was an option for cybersecurity. But I had worked in small businesses helping kind of commercialize products, and I began providing consulting and helping small businesses start and scale in the state of Delaware. And so one of the things, as we were helping businesses start and scale, one of the many programs I was running, we were like, hey, there's this new cybersecurity framework thing out here, and small businesses are really struggling with cybersecurity. What if we apply for a grant and through the SBA and see if we can kind of build a program out to help small businesses with cybersecurity based on this CSF thing? And it was really it may have been the first small business cybersecurity program based on the cybersecurity framework. And it, you know, was adopted by many other states, and all my other projects that I was running kind of went to the side And from 2014 to now, it's been mostly all small business cybersecurity. And that in itself is rewarding, just recognizing the sheer impact that the small business community has on not only the US economy, but economies around the world. So it's an honor to work with small businesses and to connect them to resources and help translate some of this technical language so that we are all stronger. So it's a very, it's a job where I have a lot of passion for, and it's a very rewarding role. So I'm thankful NIST hired me to do this.
Yeah, well, we are too. And it sounds like you are in the exact right spot. Your passion for small businesses is something that we can see, and I know it's going to translate well to our audience with all of these community financial institutions here today. So we've been hearing a lot of questions from them, and I know that you probably have too. So I'd love to get into some topics related to the NIST CSF, and starting with really CSF 2.0. As we were just talking about, you know, the NIST CSF has become something of a gold standard in the industry. And so I'd love to know, what are your hopes for this version 2.0, and where do you see the CSF going from here?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we're always focused on continuing to expand awareness of it and to get organizations to use the CSF, right? So we're going to continue to push that and talk about the CSF. And one of the focuses really has been on implementation resources. You talked about implementation examples, but I want to talk about implementation resources as a whole. Examples are one, but the quick start guides that you had mentioned, you know, we've published a few quick start guides on cybersecurity supply chain risk management, on enterprise risk management. We're going to be publishing one for public comment that kind of merges enterprise risk management and cybersecurity risk management and workforce management, all within the scope of the cybersecurity framework. And so, you know, those are some of the resources. Again, focusing on educational events that, you know, we've been trying to host and facilitate throughout the year, and the tools, expanding the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0 reference tool, expanding the overlays or the mappings on our online informative references website, so you can see the relationships across different standards and guidelines and documents that connect to NIST. And so a lot of it is focused on making sure that we're putting into the hands of those who are consuming the CSF tools that make it easier to do that. And so it's an evolution. We only published it, like you said, in 2024. But once we hit that, once we published, now we're really focusing on talking to organizations, listening, and trying to continue developing those tools.
I love that, and I can speak to that. You guys have been busy over there releasing cool resources, and I love the phrase that you keep using, tools, things that make implementation easier. And so just to let our audience know, all of those are available on nist.gov/cyberframework, and we will include links to that page and those resources in our slides in a little bit. So thank you so much for sharing that. I love that.
Yeah, and I'll add one other thing.
Yes.
Now that you got my neurons firing, we're not only linking to NIST resources on that website, that on the CSF resource library, we're also linking to community developed resources that are based on the CSF. And so, you know, we don't have unlimited resources and ideas. There are great ideas and great resources that are coming from nonprofits and trade associations, et cetera. And so, you know, if those are publicly available for organizations to consume, you know, we want to shine a spotlight on those.
Absolutely. It takes a village, right?
Yes.
When we all work together, that's when magic really can happen. And I'll say, kind of shifting gears, one of the resources that the financial industry has been really kind of relying on that was mapped to the NIST CSF was the FFIEC CAT, as I mentioned. And so based on our poll data, a lot of organizations are thinking about switching to the CSF as a replacement. So in addition to all of these tools, I'd love to hear from your perspective on as far as small businesses go and small banks, small credit unions, why would the NIST CSF be a good fit for them to consider if they are or if they're not using it? What are some of your thoughts on, how the CSF can help them from a cybersecurity perspective?
Yeah, and I'll throw in the same disclaimer that you did, that everything in this talk is my opinion and not those
Absolutely.
necessarily of NIST, but I love that. But the entire process for the CSF 2.0, from 1.0 to 1.1 to 2.0 was carried out in collaboration with stakeholders from around the world. And the financial services sector was a prominent voice in all of our requests for information and our comment periods and our workshops that we've done for every single version. Actually, the govern function bubbling up into its own function had a lot to do with discussions with the financial services sector. And so through all that input, what we ended up with is a framework that is practical and consumable, which is why the CSF is adopted across sectors and industries. And it's the what, not the how. So you kind of alluded to this a little earlier in your talk. The CSF isn't a check the box. It offers flexibility. I view it as a strategic tool, a convening mechanism or a structure where you can use the structure of the CSF for your cybersecurity risk management strategy, and then build onto it with the informative references like 853 or ISO or whatever it is. They come in and they can tell you the how, right? But it's the Cybersecurity Framework 2.0 gives you that structure to build a strategic cybersecurity risk management strategy. And then the other informative references can come in. And so it works nicely with other frameworks and other guidelines, and not in combat with them. But I will add that it's flexible for an organization of any size, and why we've seen organizations of any size use it is because of that flexibility, because they can adapt it to their context, their resource constraints, to their risk acceptance, or their risk tolerance statements. So it's up to the organization to establish the parameters in which they want to operate. And that, outside of regulatory contractual requirements, but
all those fun things.
But the organization takes into a context. And that's why I say, when you look at the CSF, there are a lot of outcomes and people think they have to achieve every single outcome. It's like, well, maybe an outcome doesn't necessarily apply to your particular organization. So you don't necessarily need to look at it like that. You need to look at where are we as an organization with our cybersecurity risk management, and where do we want to be, or where do we need to be, and how can these outcomes, whatever outcomes we've prioritized with our limited resources from the CSF, how can they get us from point A to point B?
I love that. And you are dancing around one of the struggles that our financial institutions are really facing. So I'd love to ask your thoughts on this. The CAT was very binary, right? It was a list of like 500 controls, and it was a check yes or no kind of thing. Do you do this or do you not? But the NIST CSF really dives a lot deeper. It asks much deeper questions like how and to what extent are you meeting this outcome, this desired state. So there's a lot more wiggle room there, which is very freeing. There's a lot of opportunity, but also it's a little bit of a challenge, right, from the compliance perspective. So do you have any tips or encouragement for financial institutions who are kind of new to approaching that kind of shift in thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I know wiggle room causes indigestion. You said it was freeing, and that's a great way to look at it. It is freeing to a certain extent. You know, this strategic approach to cybersecurity risk management, the goal is to encourage leadership and implementers to approach cybersecurity risk management with a broader lens, with continuous improvement in mind. And before we even get to controls, we need to know what the risk appetite of leadership is. What risks are we going to accept or mitigate or transfer, and then apply the controls to that. So you need to understand if these controls that we're implementing are actually achieving the desired results. And so this whole governance piece is so critical. And so I'll add, you know, this is really why, like I said, the govern function was added as a new function in 2.0. And somebody out there, I don't know where I read it, but it was a great quote. And if you're on this call by happenstance and it's your quote, please say it in the chat so we can attribute it to you. It's not my quote, but they say governance gives controls meaning. And I thought that was really an important line, because instead of just jumping into, all right, we need to apply XYZ control, why are we applying it? How are we maintaining it and providing oversight of that control? How is it aligned strategically to what we're trying to achieve as an organization? And so I think, you know, it's, again, that wiggle room is where you can start looking at it in terms of, this is actually a strategic exercise to figure out why we're implementing controls, what controls we need to implement, what resources we have to define that. And I'll say that one tool that the CSF has that you can use in this exercise is profiles, right? So you have CSF organizational profiles are an internal document, an internal exercise to understand, all right, this is our current state as an organization. This is how we're achieving whatever set of outcomes within the CSF. And then right next to it will be the target state. All right, this is where we want to be or where we need to be. Maybe there's upcoming legislation that's going to influence changes to how we manage cybersecurity risk. Or maybe we're onboarding a new capability or new technology. And so we want to understand where our current state is and where our target state is, and then understand the gaps in between, because then you can begin to understand, all right, we need resources to achieve XYZ. Maybe we don't have the right staffing. Maybe we need to reorganize the enterprise or the community bank. You know, it's how do we achieve our outcomes? And the great strategic tools looking at it in terms of where are we now and where do we want to be, and that profile work is excellent. And you mentioned the Cyber Risk Institute, the CRI community profile. That profile can be used as a starting point, right, for the financial services sector, or you could create another one as a group on your own for, you know, a very specific subset. But those community profiles are public-facing documents that are saying, all right, we as a community agree that these are the priorities for CSF outcomes, maybe high, medium, low. And so this can serve as a foundation for our own organizational profile for us to begin that strategic exercise.
I love that. I think you're really getting at the heart of what we're seeing here, and you're really focusing on intentionality and meaning, and not just having this list of controls that's a do or don't, but like getting to the bigger questions of why do we do this and what's it going to benefit us, you know? So I really appreciate that perspective and all of those suggestions. There's a lot of resources and tools out there, and I don't think everybody knows about those. So I really appreciate you shouting out those tools and resources. Again, on nist.gov/cyberframework, there's all kinds of resources, all kinds of links. So be sure to check that out if you haven't. I would like to actually start diving into some of the specific outcomes, though, that we've started to hear feedback from community financial institutions on. People are implementing the CSF, and so they have questions about it. So I'd like to venture into some of the most common hot topics and questions we've been hearing about and get your thoughts on those. So the first topic that I really want to dive into is supply chain risk management, or SCRM. And I'd actually like to launch a poll question here for our audience, just to kind of tee things up. So the question is, how familiar are you with the concept of supply chain risk management? And our answer options are very familiar, moderately familiar, slightly familiar, and not at all familiar, or not applicable / I don't know. I'll give you all just a couple seconds here to answer that. And I'm going to close that poll and share those results with everyone. So our answer options here, 34%, a third said they are slightly familiar, 33% said moderately familiar. So we've got about 2/3 of our attendees today kind of sitting in that middle chunk. And then almost 1 in 5, 17% said not at all familiar. So I think that that question really kind of goes to show, you know, where we are at as an industry, that this is kind of a new topic for us. We know supply chain risk management is important. There's a whole category dedicated to it in the CSF, and some people feel good about where they're at, and some people really aren't sure what it is or what it means in a cybersecurity context. So Daniel, I'd love to ask you, how would you define supply chain risk management, and what are the first few steps someone should take to really start building a process around it?
Yeah, so, you know, cybersecurity supply chain risk management is a process, right, for managing your organization's exposure to cybersecurity risks through those who are providing goods or services to the organization, right? And you then are developing your appropriate response strategies and policies and procedures to guide that relationship as you maybe onboard new technologies or as you take on a new service provider. You know, how are you articulating your security expectations in that relationship if they are accessing data or systems on your network or in your environment? We do have, like I said earlier, a quick start guide that our cybersecurity supply chain experts, we have a whole team that focuses on cybersecurity supply chain risk management at NIST, and they worked with us to develop a CSCRM quick start guide focused on the CSF, and it has a lot of great steps on where do we get started and what are the other NIST resources on cybersecurity supply chain risk management. But I think, you know, a big step for building a process around CSCRM is to start by simply identifying your organization's suppliers, right? Those who are providing those goods and services to you, and determine how critical they are, or not only suppliers, but services, I should say. You know, how critical are those to the organization? How dependent upon them are we to run our business? If it goes down, if that service goes down, or if that vendor is shut down and they can't provide their services to us, how does that impact us delivering on our core business objectives? Do we have backup policies and procedures, right? We've seen in the news where instances of, you know, and I haven't followed the news. I have the example with the auto industry, right, where the auto industry experienced an incident with a significant provider of their services, and it shut down a lot of the financial processing for dealerships. That happens a lot. So then the thought is, all right, how dependent upon we are of that, and how can we develop processes, backup processes and procedures? We saw this, I think, also with the airline industry. You know, many examples we can pull from. And so I think that a great step is to begin that inventory of what are our dependencies, critical dependencies, first and foremost. And, you know, I'll also add that, and I'm not an insurance expert, and this isn't an insurance webinar, but there are also, I've been on webinars where insurance experts have mentioned about checking with your insurance coverage to see if it covers third-party incidents, right? If that third party goes down and it impacts your core business, are you covered? Because they got shut down or they got impacted by a cybersecurity incident, but you are secondarily impacted. And so a lot of it is understanding that whole risk profile when it comes to taking on new technologies or new services or providers, because all of it is going to bring an additional layer of risk to your organization. And so, a lot of that comes down to policies and procedures that you have in place, like in your procurement processes, for instance, right? Is there a process for evaluating the privacy and security of a technology? Maybe you're using a new app for processing something, I don't know. Have you evaluated the policy, or have you evaluated the cybersecurity and privacy configurations and settings before putting this onto your network? So it's not inherently trusting these products or services before bringing them into our environments, and building in kind of structures to evaluate this privacy and security risks that they can introduce by bringing them into our network. That's a long way of answering it, but I feel like all my answers are long-winded. I'll try to be more concise.
You're good. I think that is a perfect answer, because you gave, well, first of all, you gave a lot of great answers in there. But the first one you answered for me was how to pronounce SCRM. I've been wondering that for forever. So scrim is the word of the day, everybody. I am so excited to know how to pronounce that finally. But more importantly, I think you answered a question that I didn't directly ask, which is, how is this related to third-party risk management? Our customers are used to talking about third-party risk management and vendor management and business continuity planning, disaster recovery. They're used to those terms. And so supply chain risk management is really just, I don't want to say it's just another term for that, but it's not something wholly new. It's not something they're unfamiliar with. It's something that they do have experience with, and it may not be as scary as it might sound on the surface. So I really appreciate your answer there.
Yeah, concept in security risk management that those would fall into. Yeah.
Agreed. So thank you. That is an excellent answer. I'd love to kind of shift gears now. We've just got some popcorn topics here. But another topic that we've been hearing some smatterings about is this outcome that has to do with positive cybersecurity risk. So as an industry, the financial industry, we tend to think of cybersecurity in terms of risk tolerance. We stop the bad things from happening, or we stop them from reaching a certain point that disrupts business, as we were kind of just talking about from the third party perspective. So this idea of positive risk really kind of tends to feel counterintuitive at first glance. So could you explain what a positive risk is and what kinds of strategic opportunities someone should be looking for?
Yeah, and I'll try to make this make sense. I sometimes struggle with explaining it myself in a way.
You're doing a great job.
But positive risk, as you said, it's not really talked a lot about in cybersecurity, though it is part of the common body of knowledge, really, in enterprise risk management and in project management. So in those spaces, people are pretty familiar with the concept of positive risk, but we don't really think about it very much in cybersecurity. But just as important as it is to plan for disasters, it's also important to plan for success or opportunities. And so it really kind of connects back to that strategic aim of the CSF, right? So if we think of risk as risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives, the effect of uncertainty. So an unexpected event that could occur, we tend to focus on those negative uncertainties, right? We might get hit by a ransomware attack. That's a negative uncertainty, right? We might have a data breach. That's a negative uncertainty. But maybe an organization is moving a major financial system from an in-house data center to a commercial hosting center. And that move could be considered, there are risks involved with that, but there are also opportunities for the organization involved with that move. Maybe you could outsource or lease the space that you previously had the in-house data center to another organization and increase revenue somehow that way. Or we implement a new piece of software or process in our organization, and yes, it could introduce risks, but it introduces faster customer service delivery or faster processing of loans. So there's that positive risk associated with that, as well as negative risks. And so it's just a different way of thinking about it. And so, think of a positive risk as just an opportunity. And a way to kind of, a tool that we've probably all used that you can approach it with is a SWOT analysis, right? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And that may be a useful exercise to help you think about the threats to a new initiative and the opportunities that might arise with that new initiative. So that's really kind of my best way of explaining it.
Yes, I think you did a beautiful job of explaining it. And I was sitting here thinking, like, this is all about opportunities. And for someone who struggles with painting cybersecurity in a positive light, what you're really doing is painting cybersecurity in value. Like, what is the business value that this is bringing to your organization? And so I think that your example of what are the benefits of moving this data center from in-house to an outsourced facility, like, that is very practical, that is very tangible. I happen to know it's something that a lot of our financial institutions are dealing with right now. Lots of conversations about moving to the cloud. So being able to look at something and say, from a bigger perspective, what benefit does this bring to the organization? Like, that's what we're talking about with positive risk. So I think that was an excellent response.
Well, and that's why the CSF is, a lot of times we frame it as a communications tool, right? Yeah. Because it really does facilitate communication between kind of, I won't say technical and non-technical, because everybody has their own definition for who's technical and who isn't technical. But I'll say between kind of the C-suite or the leaders making strategic decisions, and maybe those who are implementing controls or managing the implementation of controls, it kind of helps bridge, because they do talk about in terms of opportunities and threats at the strategic level, right? What's the business opportunity here? What's my return on investment? And the CSF kind of helps facilitate some of those discussions by not necessarily getting into the weeds, but by returning it back to the organization's mission and what we're trying to achieve. And these are how we're trying to achieve them, or how we can achieve them through outcomes within the CSF. And it kind of gives a different way to think about it and communicate it.
Absolutely. And when you say it like that, it sounds a whole lot less scary. So I think that is a great way of phrasing it. So I say that this next topic is kind of scary. So I'd like to dive into secure software development a little bit. And when I say secure development, I really mean just to paint that picture, the whole kit and caboodle, web apps, mobile apps, desktop apps, APIs, backend systems, automation scripting, the whole thing, anything involving writing code or integrating systems. So I want to launch another poll question here. And this one is select all that apply. So I'd love for our audience to choose the ones that apply most to you. So how does your organization approach software development? So our answer options are: we hire third-party developers for custom work, so APIs, integration scripts. We license or use third-party developed products and services, so mobile apps, things like that. We perform software development in-house, or not applicable, I don't know. I know this question's a little bit tricky and it makes you mark multiple checkboxes, so I'll give you just a few more seconds to get those votes in. Okay, for our community institutions on the call, 73% say we license or use third-party developed products, 28% we say we hire third-party developers for custom work, and 23% perform software development in-house. So I wanted to ask that question on the front end because this particular item on the NIST CSF comes with a lot of different lenses that we could apply to it, right? Everybody approaches this particular outcome a little bit differently. So some financial institutions see this and say, well, this doesn't really apply to us because we don't build software, even if they have third-party developers working in some capacity. Other financial institutions see this and say, we're not hiring developers, we're licensing products, so this doesn't really fit to us either, which is also a valid viewpoint, except there is some level of responsibility that financial institutions are held to make sure that the products that they use are securely developed. So this kind of actually goes back to that first supply chain topic we were talking about. So I do want to acknowledge there's a whole bunch of viewpoints right up front on this one and say this one's messy. So I would love to get your thoughts. How do you approach this outcome? And what are some practical ways financial institutions can apply it, even, and I'll say especially if we don't have direct control over certain development processes?
Yeah, well, you're really asking
Sorry,
tough
I know it's a
questions.
softball question, but.
Well, I will, okay, so here's how I'll approach it. So, I'll start by, again, saying that these are broad outcomes, right? And that, one, it does take your organization. That's why the organizational context is so important, understanding how we're acquiring these services or these products, and so where they're coming from, whether we're developing it in-house or it's a third-party service provider or whatever it is. So that organizational context is critical. And I'll say that these are broad outcomes, and the informative references are really going to shine a spotlight on how you better understand some of these subcategories. For instance, we could look at the CSF 2.0 tool and drill down into informative references for PRPS 6 to tie us back to 853. Right? Mm-hmm. And 853 has a lot of language that you could then use in procurement contracts. Because maybe in some of these instances or scenarios, you don't have control over the development process, but you do have control over the procurement process. You can decide whether to purchase this product or not. In most instances, I won't say that in every instance.
Write that down, that's good.
But it does go back to that C-SCRM approach, right? Do we have security vetting process for these technologies or services? Are we building into contracts required or expected maintenance of apps or capabilities that we're bringing into our systems? And so I think drilling into, for this one in particular, I think drilling into some of the informative references will help practitioners really better understand how to achieve some of the outcomes. But you're right, as I said earlier, not every single part of PRPS 6 will apply to, or PRPS will apply to every organization, because you might be using in-house talent, as I saw a few people using in-house talent, or if you're getting third-party providers to develop code for you or products for you. Again, building into that requirement, into that contract, are they using secure software development practices and holding them to that? And so adding that language into the procurement process and holding them to it is, I think, a piece of it that I would add. Because for smaller organizations, a lot of times the power in supply chain risk management is in these service level agreements and contracts, because you don't really have a lot of power in kind of how some of these organizations are developing their technologies. But for a smaller organization, some of at least the control that they can hold on to is through the agreements that they sign and agree to, and the technologies that they procure. I think that will be my response to that one.
Good job. Yeah, that's a great answer. And I love that that balance of procurement and development. You know, these are sometimes two sides of the same coin. So finding how does this apply in your environment is really what this is going to come back to. So I think that's, yeah, a great way to handle that topic. So the last specific topic before we kind of start heading into the wrap up, and this is a really fun one. I've saved the best for last, data and metadata inventory. So before we get into it, I'd love to launch one final poll question for our attendees today. And this one is, do you have a data inventory? So our answer options are yes, we have a comprehensive inventory, yes, but only for critical data. Somewhat, we do partial or informal tracking, and no, we do not have a data inventory. And then of course, not applicable or I don't know. So we'll give people just a few seconds here. And I'm going to close that and share those results. So most of our attendees, this is just the perfect bell curve. Most of our attendees fall into that middle category. So somewhat, we do partial or informal tracking, and then yes, but only for critical data. So I would love to just, again, ask your opinion on this. What is a good first step for developing a data inventory? If someone is brand new to this idea, they've never done it before, what's a realistic starting point for someone just kind of trying to wrap their mind around this outcome?
Yeah, I mean, this comes down to, you know, essentially data classification practices, right? And actually NIST is about to publish a document on data classification best practices. And so that will be coming out in the, I think, in the next few months. But, you know, how are we systematically cataloging and managing our data assets, right? And metadata on each asset might simply include who owns that data, right? Or what the sensitivity level is of it. What are the retention requirements? So those are some of that metadata that help us to ensure that we're applying the right level of controls, that we're using our limited resources, prioritizing our limited resources appropriately. So that if you understand kind of the major buckets of your data, who owns them, then you can start identifying appropriate access controls, or who has access to them at all. Access controls are critical, right? The retention requirements are critical. Looking at the sensitivity level to make sure that we're protecting those data appropriately, that we're not holding on to it for longer than we need to. You know, so this inventory that helps us also, I would say, understand, you know, where redundancies might be, right? Do we have data stored in the same data stored in multiple locations? That's unnecessarily complicating our data security program. And for organizations that have limited resources, what you want to do is take steps to unnecessarily complicate your data, your risk management, cybersecurity risk management program as a whole. But I would say in response to this question, your data asset inventory, your data management strategy. So again, knowing what data you have, where it is, who has access to it is critical for underpinning an entire cybersecurity risk management strategy. And I just want to reemphasize access control here. I don't know if I gave it its due light, because I think in addition to looking at what data do we have, this exercise really needs to document, identify and document the users who have access to the system and the system components where any data is processed or stored. In this exercise, you'll probably find that more people have privileges than is necessary. And more people probably have elevated privileges than what is necessary. I was just talking on a podcast yesterday. I promise I do more than just talk on these events, but I was talking on a podcast yesterday and I was referring to an incident. I was referring to a discussion that I was having with a group of auto aftercare suppliers. So think of auto mechanics. And the organization said, you know, we had an incident and we had backups and we had all of that and everything was great. But unfortunately, because we gave out admin privileges to more people than needed and more people had access to data than what was needed in systems, that is how it spread like fire and even compromised the backups. And so this concept of data classification and understanding where your data is and locking it down is critical to helping kind of segment your security posture, making sure that if something does happen, it can't spread. So that's a piece of it. But
So good.
yeah, I think having this is critical to your entire cybersecurity risk management strategy.
Agreed. Yeah. One of the things we like to say around here is you can't protect your data if you don't know where it lives, right? And being able to identify where that data is, that's really approachable, you know, starting to find out what data do we have and where is it. That makes this concept of a data and metadata inventory, that gives me something tangible that I can go home and do. So yeah, I really appreciate that. And the emphasis on access control. Access control saves lives. Like that is such a good, such a good point to make on this. It makes it really practical. Again, I just said practical. I feel like I've said it 100 times, but this is truly one of the best, most critical items on the CSF. So if you are looking for a to-do list for today, this is the one. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, so let's start to wind things down. I'd like to close with just a quick question for you about, well, actually, I want to do two questions. I know we're getting close to time, but this has been really valuable. So the first question that I'd like to ask is for the people who feel like they have to do it all right now, or do it all right before their next exam, or do it all before some other very soon deadline. What encouragement would you have for someone who is migrating to the NIST CSF from another framework, and they feel like, I have to do this all right now?
Yeah, but there's always something more we can do, right? Cybersecurity is about continuous improvement. It changes all the time. And so I think one of the many reasons why there's such churn and burn in this industry is because we feel like we need to do everything all at once. And so, you know, take this in pieces based upon kind of priority. I will always go back to prioritize your resources, prioritize your assets, prioritize the health of your employees, and make sure that you are, you know, looking at kind of implementing this as it is appropriate for your organization. As I said, you know, you don't have to do everything within the CSF if it doesn't fit within your organizational context. And so another thing I'll say is that, you know, a great place to start, and I keep talking about these informative references and these overlays and these mappings, is, you know, the NIST informative references, the NIST 2.0 reference tool shows all the informative references that have been mapped to CSF 2.0. And so you can begin to kind of, I think for practitioners, what I've heard is that, you know, it takes a lot of the time away from trying to figure out, all right, how does CSF 2.0 PRPS6 map to XYZ, the ISO to 853, and we're trying to map to all these other standards. The standards and the guidelines that are serve as informative references currently that are overlaid to CSF 2.0, they're not exhaustive, right? We're continuing to add them, but it gives you kind of a starting point for seeing where they overlap, and then kind of maybe where they don't overlap and where you might need to spend a little more time. And so using some of these tools to kind of help see connections across these other frameworks, if you're working on the multiple frameworks, and some might be using CIS, and there's a CIS overlay to Center for Internet Security, overlay to CSF. And so, you know, again, I would say start by, you know, looking at what you're doing well and where you are, seeing where some of these overlap, and then begin addressing the ones maybe you aren't currently addressing. So that gap analysis between our current state and our target state is really, I think, a great place to kind of focus attention. What are the gaps in between where we are and where we need to be?
I love that. And I think that that is a great note to call it on for today. Daniel, I cannot thank you enough. You have been terrific. Thank you for letting me ask you all of these questions that we've been hearing from our community financial institutions that we work with. So I personally have found this so valuable, and I know our audience has too. And speaking of audience, if you have found Daniel's insights helpful, feel free to show some love in the Q&A chat for him. Daniel, thank you so much, and feel free to turn off your camera. We will hope to see you around again sometime soon.
Thank you for the invitation, and thanks to all of you for joining on the webinar today. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so that is the NIST CSF in a nutshell. I hope that you feel more informed and ready to go take on the world, or at least take on next year's cybersecurity assessment. I will say we are at 3 o'clock, so if you need to drop off, feel free. But we are going to go ahead and move into some bonus content time for you all today. So shifting gears a bit, I mentioned early on that Tandem is a cybersecurity compliance software suite designed specifically to help organizations like yours. So if you are a current Tandem subscriber, thank you. You are the reason that we get to do free consulting webinars like this. And if you are not a current Tandem subscriber, welcome. I'm glad you are here, and I'd love to get to show you what Tandem can do. So wherever you find yourself, before we get to the Q&A, I'd like to take just a couple minutes to show you how Tandem can help you complete an assessment based on the NIST CSF. So I'm going to switch over to the software here. And we're going to start here on the global tab. So if you are not familiar, Tandem is a suite of web applications, and with the Tandem software, you can enable whatever frameworks you want. We support, I think, up to 40 frameworks right now with our product, and the NIST CSF is one of those frameworks. So if you enable that, you can create an assessment and start performing an assessment of those controls. Inside of our NIST CSF assessment, you can go through each category, each subcategory, each function, and you can identify what your current status is and what your target status is for that outcome. You can see in the description, we have the implementation examples listed. You can add comments, and I should have mentioned this earlier, but Tandem Cybersecurity Assessment comes in 2 versions. There's a free version and a pro version. And what I'm showing you today is the free version, but I am going to mention a couple of pro features. So in the pro version, you can assign responsibility and upload attachments. So those are 2 pro benefits that go on top of the free version. One of my favorite features of this product, though, is this mappings resource. Daniel talked a number of times about how the CSF is overlaid or can be used in conjunction with several other frameworks. So here you can actually see how these controls are mapped to each other. So for this outcome about managing a hardware inventory, you can see how it connects to the CIS controls. So you can see how it connects to the CSF CPGs and the FFIEC CAT. So that is a really powerful tool, and it becomes even more powerful if you've completed other assessments in Tandem. So once you've gone through and performed your full controls assessment, the gap analysis page is going to help you identify where are you now and where do you want to be. So over here, you can create a plan of action to improve. So this is really where you're going to be able to prioritize what are we going to do to make sure our controls are where we want them to be. And then at the end of the day, when you need to share this information with your board, your auditors, your examiners, you can export those documents in presentation-ready format. So we've got Word documents, PDFs, Excel spreadsheets. And if you subscribe to the Pro version, you can customize those documents in the software. So you can pick and choose what sections you want. You can rearrange the order and really create the document that you want to have. One last feature that I'd love to show you today is peer analysis. Now, this is my favorite part of this product. With peer analysis, you can compare your assessment optionally and anonymously with this one is 467 organizations who have completed the NIST CSF assessment in tandem. So that's a pretty large data set. And you can compare your results on a framework by framework basis. You can compare it on a function by function basis. You can compare it on a category by category basis. And I'll do you one better. You can even compare your results on a control by control basis. So that is a lot of detailed reporting that you can get into here. And what this really allows you to do is see how you compare with your peers. So here we can see we've answered this is fully implemented, and so have 89% of other users of this product. So we're in the same ballpark on this one, but maybe we aren't in the same ballpark on another one. You know, the answers really vary, and you can just see how you measure up. So this is a really powerful product. We just released it earlier this year, and it comes with lots of helpful reports and downloads. And again, it is free, so you are welcome to sign up for it at tandem.app/cybersecurity. If you would like access to the free Tandem Cybersecurity Assessment product, I just said you can get access to it on our website, and that is true. You can absolutely do that, but you can also sign up for access on the survey. So when you leave the session today, there's a question about if you'd like access to this product. So just say yes on that, and we will get you set up in the next few business days. For further reading, I will be including a slide with links to everything I've shared with you all today and then some. And just as a reminder, you will get a copy of the slides via email after the session. It typically takes us about 1 to 2 business days to get those over to you, so keep an eye out on your inbox. When you leave the session today, please do fill out that survey that pops up in your browser window. Let us know what you liked, what you didn't like, what topics you'd like us to cover in the future. Your feedback is incredibly valuable to us. So valuable that we are going to be giving away an Amazon gift card to one of you. So if you want cool free Amazon swag, fill out that survey, and thank you in advance. Last announcement before we get to the Q&A. If you work with a CPA firm, an MSP, a consulting firm, or other service provider, we would love to partner with you. At Tandem, we've been teaming up lately with more and more partners who want to give their clients the benefit of a trusted GRC software while making their own services more efficient. So if you'd like to learn more about being a partner, check out the program details at tandem.app/partner. And with that, I think we will pretty much wrap it up. I will take a look at the questions here, but if you need to go ahead and drop off, feel free. Thank you all so much for joining us, and don't forget to fill out that survey when you leave. And special thanks again to Daniel Eliot with NIST. This has been so informative and so educational, and I just really appreciate the time with you all today. So let me go ahead and open up that questions panel here. All right, so many great comments here. One of my favorites, think of it like an elephant, eat it one bite at a time. Absolutely, I appreciate you sharing that, Josh. Okay. We are getting some questions about certification for the NIST CSF or certification for whatever framework you end up choosing. That's a great question. So basically what that would look like is having an auditor come in and assess your status. So when you start implementing the CSF and you start performing those assessments, you would then have an independent trusted audit partner come in and perform that assessment for you. So people will still be able to do audits for the NIST CSF just like they did for your FFIEC CAT assessment. So I'd recommend looking into that. Just a shout out for our partners. Tandem partners with a lot of great audit organizations. So if you're looking for someone to come in and do an assessment of your CSF, check out our list of partners. We'd love to get you connected with someone. If we use the NIST CSF, do we need to pull inherent risk from another framework, or does NIST offer something to replace the FFIEC CAT inherent risk section? That is a great question, David, and that's one that's been coming up a lot lately. So the FFIEC CAT had a section in it that was called an inherent risk profile. And They called it inherent risk, but that's kind of, I kind of question that terminology. It was more like a business exposure profile, because with these assessments, you're not really doing a risk assessment. There's not inherent risk, and then you apply controls, and then you do residual risk. That is the risk assessment process. A controls assessment is, do we have these controls and how mature are they? You're asking kind of an entirely different set of questions. Along with that, I will say that the when you're doing a control self-assessment, the purpose of having that inherent risk profile was to kind of determine your maturity, or what maturity level you should fall into, which is a little bit different from the NIST CSF. So the CAT had that maturity model built in. That's why they had 500 questions, and it was really complicated to get through. Something like the NIST CSF is smaller, and the maturity is part of your current status and your target status assessment. So it's kind of comparing apples and oranges, right? You're doing an assessment of, are my controls mature enough for the level of risk that my organization is taking on? And with NIST, it's more of a self-assessment. You can look at those elements and say, where are we at? How do we need to apply these controls? Versus with the CAT, it had that specific piece. So that's a long way to say NIST does not have the same kind of inherent risk profile that the CAT did, but the CAT's inherent risk profile served a specific purpose. And that's really different than what most cybersecurity frameworks tend to use today. So great question. Thank you for asking. How is supply chain risk different from vendor review? Again, it overlaps. So that was a great point that Daniel made during the session today. Supply chain risk management is kind of, it connects to your vendor review process. You're taking a look and you're seeing, where are my points of exposure and have I mitigated those risks? So you're doing your vendor review to help mitigate supply chain risk. Great question. Supply chain risk management standards. Great question. How does that vary from regulatory body to regulatory body? So that's going to be, there's a lot of great guidance out there on supply chain risk management. The FFIEC's Development, Acquisition, and Maintenance booklet actually had, I think, 12 pages dedicated to supply chain risk management. So if you're looking for guidance on that, definitely check out the FFIEC's guidance in that booklet. The NIST CSF implementation examples. If you're in tandem, you can find those under the controls assessment in the description on each control. And if you're not in tandem, you can find those on the NIST website. We will be sending a link to those in the slides after the session. All right. Lots of great questions. Questions about different frameworks to use. Yes, the FFIEC sunset statement listed, I believe it was 4 different frameworks that you could look into as possible alternatives. So they listed the NIST CSF, this is the CPGs, the CRI profile, and the CIS controls. And they all kind of bring a different flavor to your cybersecurity control self-assessment. So at the end of the day, that's ultimately going to be up to you. So there's no one right answer over another. So I will say the NIST CSF is kind of the gold standard of frameworks. So it has connections to all of these. So there's nothing saying you can't do multiples of them if you want to. So one of the great features of like having that mappings component is being able to see, how do these frameworks overlap? How do they connect to each other? And have I already answered this question before? One feature I didn't get to show you in tandem, but in the pro version of the cybersecurity assessment product, there is an import feature where you can actually import your answers to give you a starting point from another framework. So if you completed the NIST CSF, or you completed the CAT, or you completed the CRI profile or the CIS controls, you could import your answers from that framework into another one if you wanted to. So great question. So many good questions. Thank you all so much for joining us today. If we did not get to your question during our session today, we will follow up with you via email afterwards. But I really appreciate you all being here. I hope this has been helpful for you, and I hope to see you around. We are going to call it for today. So have a great afternoon and have a blessed rest of your week.